Welcome to our video on Virginia lease and landlord-tenant laws. As a landlord, it's essential to know your rights and responsibilities to manage your rental property well. With that in mind, here are some important landlord-tenant laws in the Old Dominion state. The lease agreement is the foundation of the landlord-tenant relationship. It's a legally binding contract between a landlord and tenant that sets the terms of the rental relationship. The most common type of lease agreement is a one-year, fixed-term lease that terminates at the end of the lease term. This is often referred to as a standard lease agreement. In addition to the basic terms of the lease, there are some additional things that Virginia landlords must include in their lease. Landlords must provide tenants with their name and contact information, as well as the name of any agent authorized to act on their behalf. Notices may be sent electronically in Virginia, so the landlord's and tenant's email address should be included in the lease. The landlord must provide the tenant with a written report documenting the rental unit's condition at move-in. This must be done within 5 days of the tenant taking occupancy, and it's deemed correct unless the tenant objects within 5 days of receiving the report. If the landlord has knowledge of the presence of mold in the property, this must be disclosed in the move-in checklist. If the tenant discovers mold, the landlord will have 5 days from the start of the occupancy to respond. If the property is in an area with an airbase or within a military zone, landlords must provide tenants with a military noise disclosure. If the property was used to manufacture methamphetamine and hasn't been cleaned according to Virginia procedures, tenants must be provided with a methamphetamine disclosure. Pursuant to federal law, if a property was built before 1978, tenants must be provided with a lead-based paint disclosure and pamphlet. If the landlord is aware that the property has defective drywall, this must be disclosed to the tenants. If there is a planned demolition or a 6-month plan to demolish the property, this must be disclosed to the tenants. If the property has a submeter or shared utilities, the method for calculating the tenant's share of utilities must be disclosed.
Next, let's talk about key landlord-tenant laws in Virginia. Virginia landlords must provide tenants with a copy of the Virginia Statement of Tenant Rights and Responsibilities, along with a copy of the lease agreement within 1 month of the start of the tenancy. Every 12 months, landlords must provide tenants with a certificate stating that all smoke alarms are where they are supposed to be, have been inspected, and are in good working condition. In Virginia, the security deposit may not exceed 2 months' rent. The security deposit must be returned to the tenants within 45 days of the tenant vacating the property or the end of the lease term, whichever is later. Unless the tenant has requested that the landlord enter for a maintenance issue, the landlord must provide 72 hours notice before entering the property. The landlord should only enter during reasonable hours. Late fees cannot be assessed until rent is at least 5 days late. Any late fees must be stated in the lease agreement and cannot exceed 10% of the rent amount or 10% of the amount due, whichever is less. Virginia landlords may require tenants to get renter's insurance, and we always encourage landlords to do this. Return payment fees must be stated in the lease agreement and cannot exceed $50. All Virginia landlords should be familiar with lease termination and renewal laws. Fixed-term leases terminate at the end of the term, unless otherwise stated in the lease agreement. Month-to-month leases can be terminated by either party with 30 days' notice. Virginia does not impose a limit on how much a landlord can increase rent. However, the lease should specify the procedures and notice requirements for rent increases.
Virginia law requires landlords to maintain the rental property in a habitable condition. This includes ensuring essential services like plumbing, heating, and electricity function correctly. Tenants must promptly notify landlords of any necessary repairs. Tenants in Virginia have specific rights, including the right to pay rent into a court's escrow account if necessary repairs are not made. Retaliation by the landlord against tenants is strictly prohibited. If a tenant fails to pay rent or violates the lease agreement, the landlord may initiate the eviction process. When doing so, landlords must adhere strictly to Virginia law. Landlords can never resort to self-help eviction methods, such as changing locks or shutting off utilities. Congratulations, you're now familiar with key lease laws and you're ready to create your Virginia lease. While the lease laws might sound complicated, keep in mind that our Virginia lease automatically includes all required disclosures and gives you state assist tips as you create your lease. Before you turn over possession of your rental, make sure you've screened all tenants, have an executed Virginia lease agreement, and you've collected the entire security deposit and first month's rent. As you manage your rental, remember that we have over 400 property management forms, including Virginia state-specific forms. Visit easylandlordforms.com to start your tenant screening, create a Virginia lease agreement that's guaranteed to comply with all Virginia lease laws, and access Virginia property management forms.